Have you ever noticed how two people can face the same insult? One explodes with rage, and the other remains completely calm. Same words, same situation, different reaction. Why? Because anger is never about what happens outside of you. It is always about what gets touched inside of you. And once you understand this truth, no one will ever be able to control your emotions again. Anger is not caused by others, it is activated by the unresolved parts of your own psyche. This idea sounds confronting because it removes the comfort of blame. It takes the spotlight off the outside world and turns it inward toward the hidden regions of the mind that most people avoid examining. Yet this single shift in perception changes everything about how anger is understood, experienced, and ultimately mastered. When someone insults you, ignores you, criticizes you, or disrespects you, it feels natural to say, "They made me angry." But this statement gives your emotional power away. It suggests that your inner world is at the mercy of external behavior. In reality, if another person truly had the power to manufacture anger inside you, they would be able to produce the same intensity of rage in everyone under the same conditions. But that never happens. One person shrugs off the insult, another is deeply wounded, a third explodes with fury. The situation is the same, yet the emotional outcome is completely different. This proves that anger is not injected from the outside. It is triggered from within. Every emotional reaction requires an internal structure to respond. If there is no wound, no insecurity, no suppressed fear, no unresolved conflict, the stimulus passes through without resistance. The moment anger appears, it reveals that something inside is still raw. The outside world merely presses the bruise. It does not create it. The unresolved psyche is like a hidden pressure point. When touched, it reacts instantly, often before conscious thought has time to intervene. Much of this unresolved material lives beneath conscious awareness. Early experiences, unprocessed humiliation, ignored grief, buried shame, and unmet emotional needs accumulate quietly over time. Because these inner tensions are uncomfortable, the mind often pushes them down, locking them out of everyday awareness. But repression does not dissolve emotional energy, it only relocates it. What is buried becomes reactive. It waits for a similar emotional pattern to appear in the present, and when it does, the old energy erupts with the force of something much larger than the current situation deserves. This is why anger often feels disproportionate. A small comment ignites a massive reaction. A minor disagreement turns into rage. A simple boundary feels like betrayal. The intensity is not coming from the present moment alone. It is amplified by everything unfinished within the psyche. The present is only the spark. The fuel was stored long before the trigger appeared. Unresolved aspects of the psyche often revolve around identity wounds. A person who carries unhealed feelings of worthlessness becomes highly sensitive to disrespect. Someone who has suppressed fear of abandonment reacts strongly to perceived rejection. A person who was never allowed to express anger in childhood may feel overwhelmed by it in adulthood. The external event feels like the cause, but in truth, it is merely a reminder of something older and deeper that was never given full attention. Anger also serves as a psychological defense. It rises to protect the vulnerable parts of the self that feel threatened. Beneath anger, there is almost always fear, shame, sadness, or powerlessness. These emotions feel unbearable to the ego, so the psyche converts them into anger because anger feels strong. It feels active. It feels like control. But the presence of anger is not evidence of strength. It is evidence of an inner area that still feels unsafe. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that the unconscious always seeks expression. If unresolved material is not faced directly, it demands attention through emotional reactions. Anger becomes the language through which the unconscious speaks. It interrupts conversations, hijacks relationships, distorts perception, and reshapes memory. It convinces the mind that the threat is external when the true conflict is internal. The illusion that others cause our anger is deeply comforting because it justifies emotional reactivity. If someone else is responsible, then the anger feels righteous. It feels earned. It feels necessary. But this belief also traps the individual in permanent emotional dependence. As long as anger is seen as something imposed from the outside, peace remains unreachable. Every new person becomes a potential trigger. Every social interaction becomes a risk. Every disagreement becomes a battlefield. When anger is understood as activation rather than creation, responsibility returns to its rightful place. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior or accepting mistreatment. It means recognizing that two processes are occurring at once: the external event and the internal reaction. One may be inappropriate or unfair, but the emotional explosion reveals something about the inner world that demands awareness. This perspective transforms anger from a weapon into a teacher. Instead of asking, why did they do this to me? The question becomes, what inside me is still unresolved that made this hurt so deeply? Each trigger becomes a diagnostic tool. Each emotional surge becomes a clue pointing toward an unfinished psychological task. The psyche uses discomfort as a signal to draw attention to what has not yet been integrated. As long as unresolved parts remain hidden, they will continue to dictate reactions. They will distort judgment, hijack self-control, and repeat emotional patterns in different situations with different people. The faces change, the tone changes, the setting changes, but the same anger keeps returning because the same unresolved material remains active beneath awareness. Once a person begins to observe their anger without immediately acting on it, a separation forms between the reaction and the identity. The emotion is no longer who I am, but what is happening within me. This shift creates space. In that space, patterns become visible. The same types of comments trigger the same reactions. The same fears keep resurfacing. The same emotional wounds reveal themselves again and again, each time through a different person. With sustained awareness, the psyche slowly gives up its need to project its conflicts onto the outside world. Instead of using others as emotional scapegoats, the individual begins to encounter the true source of the tension within. The unresolved parts no longer need to shout through anger when they are finally being acknowledged, examined, and brought in. Conscious understanding what emotionally disturbs you is often a reflection of what you have not yet mastered within yourself. This principle, though subtle, has the power to completely transform the way we perceive our reactions, our relationships, and even the challenges we face in life. At its core, it suggests that the turbulence we feel in response to others is rarely about them at all. It is about the unresolved aspects, the unacknowledged tendencies, and the hidden vulnerabilities that reside within us. Consider the people who provoke strong reactions in you. Perhaps it is arrogance, rudeness, or criticism that sets you off. You may find yourself suddenly consumed by irritation, resentment, or even rage. Most people naturally point the finger outward, believing that it is the other person's behavior that created this storm of emotion. Yet, if we pause and examine our response, we begin to see a different truth. What triggers us in another is often something we have not yet integrated, something within ourselves that remains immature, unhealed, or underdeveloped. For example, if a person's success or confidence stirs feelings of envy in you, it is likely that there is a part of yourself that you have not yet acknowledged or cultivated. Your internal dissatisfaction projects outward, coloring your perception and amplifying the emotional disturbance. Similarly, if criticism feels unbearable, it may be reflecting an unresolved sensitivity, a fear of inadequacy, or a fragile sense of self-worth that has not been consciously addressed. The emotional disturbance acts as a mirror, showing us where our inner life is incomplete or unmastered. The unconscious mind plays a central role in this dynamic. Many aspects of our emotional landscape operate below conscious awareness. These are the traits, tendencies, and unresolved conflicts that we either suppress, ignore, or refuse to confront. When someone's words or actions touch these hidden aspects, the unconscious reacts. Anger, resentment, or hurt emerges, often out of proportion to the situation, because the trigger resonates with something unresolved. The external event is simply a catalyst. The real source of disturbance lies within. Understanding that emotional disturbance is a reflection of inner mastery, or the lack thereof, shifts the locus of responsibility. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of other people's behavior, you begin to see yourself as the steward of your own inner world. Each moment of irritation, envy, fear, or resentment is an opportunity for self-examination. It is a signal pointing to what requires attention, growth, or healing. Emotional reactions are no longer random or arbitrary. They are diagnostic tools that reveal the areas of life where consciousness has not yet fully matured. This perspective also reframes conflict. Arguments, disagreements, and interpersonal tensions are often treated as external battles, with one party seen as right and the other as wrong. But when we recognize that the disturbance is a reflection of what is unmastered within ourselves, Conflict becomes a doorway to self-awareness. The irritations that arise, the judgments we make, the discomfort we feel, these are all invitations to explore the inner territory that remains unfamiliar, unresolved, or underdeveloped. The challenge shifts from trying to change others to understanding and integrating our own reactions. Mastery over oneself does not mean eliminating all emotional reactions. On the contrary, it involves recognizing and working with these reactions consciously. It requires cultivating the ability to observe emotions as they arise, identify the internal trigger, and reflect on why this disturbance occurred. It requires honesty in acknowledging the parts of ourselves that remain immature, unintegrated, and courage to engage with them rather than project them outward. Emotional disturbance then becomes a guide, not a burden, leading toward greater self-knowledge and resilience. Another important aspect of this principle is its consistency across different people and situations. Often, we are disturbed by the same patterns repeatedly. Certain types of comments, behaviors, or attitudes consistently provoke strong reactions. This repetition is not coincidence. It indicates the persistent presence of unresolved dynamics within our own psyche. By examining these recurring patterns, we can uncover deeply held beliefs, suppressed emotions, and latent fears that have yet to be mastered. The world becomes a mirror, reflecting back the aspects of ourselves that demand attention. As we engage with this process, we also develop a more nuanced understanding of others. When we recognize that our disturbance is rooted in our own inner world, we become less judgmental, less reactive, and less dependent on external validation. People's behavior no longer has the power to destabilize us in the same way because we are no longer unconsciously feeding the emotional fire. Awareness, self-reflection, and emotional responsibility transform interactions from reactive chaos into conscious choice. Ultimately, the emotional disturbances that arise in daily life are neither random nor meaningless. They are meaningful signals pointing toward the parts of ourselves that require conscious engagement. The intensity of our reaction often corresponds to the depth of what is unmastered. Minor irritations may indicate surface-level unresolved tendencies, while intense anger or hurt may highlight deeper, more entrenched inner conflicts. By paying attention to these signals, by exploring them honestly and without judgment, we gradually reclaim mastery over our inner world. Each moment of disturbance thus offers an opportunity for growth, for integration, and for refinement of consciousness. The key lies in turning inward rather than outward, in observing the reactions without immediately labeling them as caused by someone else, and in using these emotional experiences as a lens to examine what remains unmastered within. The outer world may present countless challenges, but it is through engagement with our inner disturbances that true strength, clarity, and peace emerge. Inner peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to observe conflict without becoming it. This concept challenges the common misconception that peace is a passive state, a calm devoid of tension, or a life free from disagreements and challenges. True inner peace does not mean escaping difficulty. It means cultivating a mindset and presence that allows one to encounter the turbulence of life without being consumed by it. It is the capacity to remain centered and undisturbed, even when the world is chaotic, unpredictable, or hostile. Conflict is an inevitable aspect of existence. Relationships, work, society, and even one's own inner world present constant opportunities for tension and disagreement. Trying to eliminate conflict altogether is not only unrealistic but also counterproductive, because it is through engagement with challenges that growth, understanding, and self-mastery arise. Those who seek peace by avoiding conflict often find themselves living in a fragile calm, a temporary reprieve that shatters at the first provocation. This kind of avoidance creates vulnerability because the external circumstances inevitably shift, and the absence of conflict in the environment does not equate to inner stability. The hallmark of true inner peace lies in the distinction between experience and reaction. Conflict may exist around us or even within us, but we are not obligated to merge with it. Most people, when confronted with disagreement, insult, or challenge, allow themselves to become identified with the emotional storm. Anger, fear, anxiety, or frustration floods the mind, and the conflict becomes part of the self. At this point, the individual is no longer a conscious observer, but a participant in the chaos, often unconsciously feeding it and amplifying its intensity. The external conflict appears larger than it is because it is magnified by an internal lack of mastery. Observing conflict without becoming it requires awareness. Awareness is the ability to notice what is happening both externally and internally without immediate judgment or reaction. When a disagreement arises, a person with cultivated inner peace can perceive the situation, acknowledge the emotions it triggers, and understand the dynamics at play without being overwhelmed. They see the anger, fear, or frustration that emerges as signals rather than as mandates to act impulsively. The mind retains clarity and the body retains calm. There is still engagement with the situation, but it is a deliberate, conscious engagement rather than a reactive one. This capacity also involves recognizing that the source of disturbance is not always external. Often, conflict touches unresolved areas within the self, activating emotions that pre-exist in the psyche. When these triggers are acknowledged and observed, rather than suppressed or projected outward, the individual remains grounded. They may respond appropriately, assert boundaries, or take action, but their emotional state is not dictated by the conflict itself. Instead, they act from a place of conscious choice, informed by awareness rather than compulsion. Another important aspect is the understanding that conflict is multi-layered. External conflict may be obvious, an argument with a colleague, a confrontation with a friend, or a societal disagreement, but internal conflict often coexists. A mind untrained in observation tends to merge the two, interpreting external tension as an existential threat. Those who cultivate inner peace, however, can distinguish between the reality of the situation and the internal projection or amplification of that situation. They recognize that anger, fear, or resentment is often a reflection of what is unresolved within, and by maintaining observation, they prevent these emotions from controlling them. Inner peace is strengthened through consistent practice and self-discipline, mindfulness, reflection, and the willingness to face uncomfortable emotions without immediate action are tools that enhance the ability to witness conflict without merging with it. The person who develops this skill begins to see conflict as an opportunity for insight rather than as a threat. Each challenging interaction becomes a mirror, revealing personal patterns, unconscious tendencies, and areas that require attention or growth. In this way, conflict is no longer an enemy to be eradicated, but a teacher to be understood and integrated. Furthermore, observing conflict without becoming it enhances resilience and emotional stability. Life presents an endless array of provocations, criticism, opposition, betrayal, and unexpected challenges. A mind trained in observation maintains balance in the face of these events. Emotional reactions are measured, conscious, and informed rather than automatic and destructive. This does not mean detachment in the sense of indifference. Rather, it is a form of engagement that preserves the integrity of the self. The individual can act, respond, or intervene, but they do so from a position of calm authority rather than impulsive reaction. The cultivation of this kind of inner peace also changes one's relationship with others. People who merge with conflict often escalate it unconsciously, contributing to cycles of misunderstanding and hostility. Those who observe without becoming it, however, act as stabilizing forces. Their presence does not inflame tension but models composure, clarity, and self-mastery. In social, professional, and personal settings, they become anchors amid turbulence, capable of navigating challenges without losing equilibrium. Ultimately, inner peace is not a passive withdrawal from the world. It is an active engagement with life's difficulties, marked by a conscious separation between the observer and the turbulence observed. It allows for clarity of thought, steadiness of emotion, and purposeful action. Conflict remains a part of life, but the individual is no longer defined or controlled by it. The capacity to observe without becoming the conflict transforms every challenge into an opportunity for understanding, growth, and mastery of the inner world. Emotional triggers are invitations to self-awareness, not weapons meant to destroy you. This perspective is both radical and liberating because it reframes the way we experience the emotional turbulence that arises in our daily lives. Most people instinctively interpret triggers as attacks either from the outside world or from other people and respond defensively, often with anger, resentment, or fear. Yet, when we shift our understanding, triggers cease to be instruments of victimization and instead become powerful signals pointing to areas within ourselves that require attention, reflection, and integration. A trigger is any stimulus, an event, a comment, a behavior that provokes an immediate and often intense emotional response. These responses are rarely proportionate to the situation itself. A seemingly harmless remark can evoke rage, A minor criticism can produce shame. A fleeting rejection can feel like the end of the world. On the surface, it may appear as though the external world is assaulting you, but the intensity of the response reveals something deeper. The trigger has activated something unresolved within your own psyche. It is a mirror reflecting your inner state, not a weapon in the hands of another. Triggers operate through association. When a situation resonates with a past experience, especially one that has been suppressed or left unexamined, it produces an automatic emotional reaction. This is often why certain comments, behaviors, or circumstances can provoke disproportionate responses that seem irrational to others. These reactions are not the fault of the external actor, they are the echoes of unresolved fears, insecurities, or wounds. The human mind tends to replay patterns from the past using current circumstances as a stage upon which old emotions are acted out. In this sense, triggers are deeply personal and reveal what remains unmastered within us. Recognizing triggers as invitations to self-awareness requires a shift in perception and response. Instead of asking, why did they make me feel this way? The more productive question becomes, what inside me is being stirred right now? This simple reframing transforms the emotional experience from a reactive confrontation into an introspective opportunity. It encourages curiosity rather than judgment, observation rather than explosion, and understanding rather than blame. The trigger is no longer an enemy, it is a guide, highlighting the precise areas where the psyche is unintegrated or vulnerable. Self-awareness cultivated through triggers is not superficial. It demands honesty and courage. It requires looking at the parts of yourself that you may prefer to ignore, the insecurities, the fears, the unhealed emotional wounds, and the patterns that repeat across relationships and situations. These are the very aspects of the self that emotional triggers illuminate. By attending to these areas consciously, rather than projecting blame outward, one begins the process of integration, bringing previously unconscious elements into awareness, understanding their origins, and choosing how to respond rather than reacting automatically. Triggers also carry a transformative potential that goes beyond mere self-reflection. Each activation is an opportunity to strengthen emotional resilience. By observing triggers without becoming consumed by them, the mind develops the ability to navigate future provocations with equanimity. The intensity of the initial reaction diminishes over time, not because external circumstances have changed, but because the internal response has been consciously understood and regulated. This process transforms what was once a source of vulnerability into a source of empowerment. Another dimension of understanding triggers as invitations to self-awareness involves the relationships we have with others. Often, the individuals who provoke us are not intentionally malicious, they are unconsciously reflecting aspects of ourselves or interacting in ways that align with unresolved patterns. By perceiving triggers in this light, interactions cease to be battlegrounds and instead become mirrors, revealing dynamics that require attention and offering opportunities for conscious engagement. The external behavior is not controlling or destructive, it is informative and illuminating. The mind, when untrained, tends to interpret triggers as assaults on identity, values, or self-esteem. This interpretation fuels reactive behavior, escalating conflicts and perpetuating cycles of emotional pain. Yet when triggers are reframed as signals, the immediate reaction shifts from defensiveness to inquiry. A comment that once provoked indignation may now provoke reflection. A gesture that once incited anxiety may now provoke insight. This conscious engagement fosters emotional intelligence, self-mastery, and a deeper understanding of the patterns that shape our inner and outer worlds. Understanding triggers as invitations also encourages personal responsibility. It shifts the locus of control from the external world to the internal self. When a person acknowledges that their reaction originates from within, they reclaim authority over their emotional life. Others no longer hold the keys to your emotional state. Instead, your responses become conscious choices rather than automatic reactions. The empowerment that arises from this realization is profound, as it dissolves the illusion that people, events, or circumstances have the capacity to dictate your inner state. Finally, embracing triggers as tools for self-awareness nurtures a continuous process of growth. Emotional triggers appear repeatedly, often in similar patterns, reflecting the areas where the psyche still seeks integration. Each recurrence is an opportunity to deepen understanding, to refine emotional regulation, and to cultivate a more conscious relationship with oneself. Rather than fearing triggers or attempting to eliminate them, one learns to welcome them, to study them, and to allow them to illuminate the path toward greater self-knowledge, resilience, and mastery of the inner world. True emotional power is the capacity to remain centered while the world tries to pull you off balance. This kind of power is not loud, dramatic, or externally visible. It is subtle, internal, and profoundly transformative. Many people mistake emotional power for the ability to dominate others, control situations, or impose their will. Yet, the deepest form of emotional strength does not rely on external control. It emerges from an unshakable inner stability that allows a person to navigate life's storms without being swept away by them. The world is inherently unpredictable. People behave in ways that defy logic. Circumstances shift without warning, and unforeseen challenges constantly arise. Most individuals respond to these dynamics by reacting immediately, often unconsciously, to protect themselves, preserve their ego, or assert dominance. These reactions, however, are rarely rooted in genuine strength. They are manifestations of imbalance, of being pulled by external forces rather than anchored from within. True emotional power, in contrast, begins with awareness, the recognition that while the external world cannot always be controlled, the internal world can be cultivated, maintained, and directed. Remaining centered is both an art and a discipline. It requires the ability to observe life's fluctuations without merging with them. Emotions, thoughts, and external events are seen as phenomena to be experienced, not as imperatives that must dictate action. For example, when provoked by criticism, a person without emotional power may react defensively, angrily, or impulsively. Their sense of identity becomes entwined with the stimulus, and the world successfully pulls them off balance. A person with true emotional power, however, perceives the criticism, acknowledges the feeling it generates, and responds or does not respond from a grounded place of clarity. The external disturbance does not define them or their state of mind. This capacity requires self-knowledge. Emotional power is inseparable from the understanding of one's own inner landscape, the fears, insecurities, patterns, and unresolved conflicts that can be triggered in moments of stress. By knowing oneself deeply, a person can anticipate where they are likely to be vulnerable and cultivate strategies for maintaining equilibrium. Without self-awareness, the external world retains the capacity to manipulate emotions, provoke anxiety, and disrupt judgment. Emotional power emerges precisely where internal mastery intersects with external unpredictability. Another crucial element is the mastery of impulse. A centered individual does not act on every emotional reaction. They discern which impulses serve a constructive purpose and which arise from unconscious habit or ego-driven fear. This discernment transforms chaos into choice. When faced with confrontation, rejection, or hostility, the emotionally powerful person is able to respond deliberately rather than react automatically. Their choices are guided not by the desire to dominate or retaliate, but by clarity, integrity, and the larger context of their values. This restraint is not weakness. It is an expression of profound control over the self. Remaining centered also requires cultivating resilience. Life will inevitably present challenges that test composure, betrayals, failures, losses, and unforeseen pressures. Emotional power is not the absence of struggle. It is the ability to experience difficulty without losing one's equilibrium. This is achieved through a combination of perspective, acceptance, and the understanding that external events are transient and often beyond personal control. By maintaining a broader awareness of the impermanent nature of circumstances, the mind becomes less reactive to temporary disturbances and more capable of maintaining a consistent internal state. The centered individual also exhibits emotional independence. They do not rely on validation, approval, or the opinions of others to regulate their inner state. Their confidence and composure are internally sourced, which makes them less susceptible to manipulation, provocation, or the emotional swings of those around them. In social and professional interactions, this presence is palpable. Others may act unpredictably, attempt to incite reactions, or create tension, but the emotionally powerful person remains unmoved. Their center is not a fortress of detachment, but a dynamic equilibrium that allows engagement without vulnerability to chaos. True emotional power also enhances relationships, leadership. A person who remains centered provides stability in the midst of turmoil, offering calm guidance and measured responses. They are able to listen deeply, understand multiple perspectives, and act with clarity rather than impulse. Their interactions are marked by patience, empathy, and authority not because they impose control externally, but because their inner balance naturally influences the dynamics around them. Developing this capacity requires ongoing practice, mindfulness, reflection, and disciplined attention to one's emotional states. Cultivate the awareness necessary for remaining centered. Life will continuously test composure, but each encounter offers an opportunity to strengthen inner equilibrium. Emotional power is measured not by the absence of challenges, but by the ability to meet them without losing oneself. It is a mastery that blends self-knowledge, restraint, resilience, and awareness, enabling a person to navigate the complexities of life with grace, stability, and enduring presence. The world will always try to provoke you. People will always test you. Life will always apply pressure. But the day you master your inner world, no outer storm will ever be able to touch you again. You won't need to fight. You won't need to shout. You won't need to prove anything, because the calm you carry will speak louder than any anger ever could. And once you reach that state, they don't control you anymore. You control yourself.